Is this the dagger?
Welcome to another episode of the On the Ball Show here on the TWSN YouTube channel. I'm your host, Pranav and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Christian DeBlock. Christian, how are you doing today?
Good. We had a couple very emphatic games last night. Super excited to talk about the NBA. We haven't been here in a couple weeks talking on the show, so super excited to bring us all the content and analysis tonight.
Right, and we have the Hawks game getting underway right now, and then we have Suns Nuggets, I believe, coming up tonight. So there's a lot going on, a lot to discuss. But before we get into it, make sure to go subscribe to our YouTube channel as described below. Make sure to go follow our Instagram at TWSN and on Twitter at TWSN__. And with that being said, let's get right into the action. So last night we saw the second game of the Utah Jazz Clippers series pan out with the Utah Jazz. It was pretty one-sided for most of the game. The Clippers made a late fourth-quarter comeback, which made the game a lot closer than it had to be. But the Jazz take a 2-0 series lead in that series. So, Christian, I wanted to ask you, should we be concerned for the Los Angeles Clippers? Last series, they were down 2-0. Kawhi's been down 2-0 multiple times before, and he's come back. Should we be concerned right now? Or are you just going to wait to see how things play out in Game 3, knowing Kawhi Leonard's history?
You know, I think Game 3 is big. I think if they go on to lose Game 3, I think it's over. I don't know. They maybe could get Game 4, but I think it would be done in 5. But the difference between the Jazz and the Mavericks is there was Luka Doncic. There's Donovan Mitchell here. But the difference between these two teams is that Donovan Mitchell has support. Luka, of course, did not. And I think we saw that in that Dallas series that Porzingis just didn't look himself. Tim Hardaway had some really big games early in the series, but really didn't show up towards the end. But the Jazz, they don't even have Mike Conley right now, just to mention one guy. But Jordan Clarkson came up with over 20 points last night. Mike Conley's not even available yet. They still have Bogdanovich. I mean, Rudy Gobert has continued to show his impact on the defensive end especially. This Jazz team is just completely different compared to that Mavericks team. So, yes, I am, pretty concerned for the Clippers. If they go on to lose Game 3, I believe the series is over. So, Game 3 back at the Staples Center is very important. And if they go on to lose that game and Paul George and, Kawhi Leonard, because, funny enough, Reggie Jackson put up 29 points last night. They got a lot from him. I mean, the only guy that really struggled last night was Marcus Morris, who went 4 for 11. But other than that, I mean, getting 29 points from Reggie Jackson's incredible. They should have, taken advantage of that. But, I'm pretty concerned. I think if they do lose Game 3, the series is over.
They need to get both games at home. They need to get both games in Los Angeles. Otherwise, the series is over regardless. I mean, I'm thinking along the same lines of you. I mean, the Dallas Mavericks were completely different. That was a completely different situation in terms of they had a one-man wrecking crew in Luka. However, with the Utah Jazz, they're elite on both the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball, and that's huge. They probably have the best spacing in the NBA, so it's going to be hard to stop them. Their constant ball movement within their offense. Donovan Mitchell has been absolutely crazy throughout this series. They have no answer for him, absolutely none, and they've shown that they can't guard him regardless. He could drive, he could shoot. He's been doing it all for them. And then when you talk about the supporting cast, they're playing to their role. I mean, Clarkson's been pretty solid. He's done what he's done all season long. Ingles has dominated the matchup with Paul George. Should I be surprised? I mean, we've seen it in the past. I mean, you take a look at that matchup. You see Bogdanovich held Kawhi Leonard to Bojan. But Bojan held Kawhi Leonard to 1 of 4 shooting last night in the fourth quarter. I mean, all these role players surrounding Mitchell and Gobert, and obviously Gobert is doing his thing on the defensive end. So all these role players surrounding Gobert and Mitchell are stepping up when it matters most. And then you factor in that they don't even have Mike Conley back yet. That's their third best player. You insert him back into the rotation. That gives you another playmaking option, another efficient three-point shooter. You factor in all those different things, and I think the Jazz – I have the Jazz winning this series at this point due to how overwhelming of an advantage they have in all of these departments. But in terms of stopping them, they have to win Game 3 and Game 4. You can't lose either of them. If the Jazz go up 3-1, it's over. It's over because they'll just be heading back to Utah with Game 7 in their house. So they need to steal both games in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, obviously Donovan Mitchell didn't play Game 1 in the Memphis series, but ever since, they have not lost since he came back in the lineup. And like you mentioned, I mean, everybody's playing to the role. I mean, they're having trouble even, containing Gobert's impact on both ends of the floor to the point where Boogie Cousins, was inserted into the lineup last night and played some big minutes. Ty Lue, it was interesting. He took out Rondo out of the lineup last night and inserted Patrick Beverley, who played some big minutes. And, they did make that run last night in the third quarter where Reggie Jackson hit a couple threes at one point where they took the lead. But, they continue to the Jazz. Everybody's playing well. Donovan Mitchell is, scoring against two of the best two-way wings in the NBA. I mean, he's playing at an absurd level. I saw on your Twitter and a lot of people's social media, and people are, taking it a little far and saying, he's on a superstar level and almost a guy
the best player in Jazz history.
Yeah, I mean, that's taking it to a level it probably shouldn't be taken at, but credit to him. He's playing at the best level of his career right now. He showed over the course of his career he's taking it to the next level in the playoffs versus a guy like Paul George who goes a little under what he usually does in the regular season. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I think they got to take care of business at the Staples Center or else this series is over, and it doesn't look pretty for them right now for sure.
Right. And speaking of the Los Angeles Clippers, I need to say something about Paul George. Like, I just see his fans and Paul George supporters talk about Paul George after every solid game he has. I mentioned it on my Twitter last night. They're like, give Paul George his damn respect. But he's just doing his job. We don't see that for any other star. Why are we holding Paul George? Why are we praising Paul George for having a normal performance compared to every other star when he's just doing the bare minimum of what's expected out of him? Is it because he underperforms so much? That shouldn't be a reason why we're giving the man extra praise, because I haven't seen anything spectacular. He's been good in the Clippers series. He hasn't been good against the Jazz yet, but he's not done anything out of this world to give me extra praise than he actually deserves. So I wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, and I think, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are playing at, their own normal level, I would say. Donovan Mitchell certainly is by far the best player in this series so far, and I don't think it's very close.
Right.
So, yeah, I completely agree with you. I think, Paul George is he's playing better than he was last year, which I guess is probably why people who are, fans of Paul George are praising him now. But, yeah, I completely agree with you. I think, last season he was, really – he struggled a lot in the bubble. And, he's playing – well, I would say, but that's not, something you should be praising, especially when you're down 2-0 and you don't look like you have a very good shot of winning the series if you don't play well at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're going to keep it going here, moving on from the Clippers-Jazz series, and we're going to take it to another game that happened last night, and that was the Milwaukee Bucks finally won a game in the Brooklyn Nets, in their series against the Brooklyn Nets. They won 86-83. It was a low-scoring game. At the end of the game, both teams started off hot in the first half. The Nets started off cold in the first quarter while the Bucks came out really hot, and then it was the opposite in the second quarter. And then from there, it was just pretty stagnant till the end, where Bruce Brown took a couple late shots instead of KD or Kyrie. And I wanted to know what your takeaways from that game were. Do you think the Bucks can actually come back in the series, or do you think the series is over? And in terms of Giannis, do we start having the conversations now about his limitations in the playoffs, or do we still give him time due to his age?
Yeah, so in terms of last night, I got a chance to watch the whole game. That start from the Bucks was ridiculous. I mean,
Right.
They were just pouncing on every mistake that the Nets were not hitting shots at the beginning of the game, but credit to them. They, in that second quarter, made a huge run. Everybody was, scoring, and the Bucks, like you mentioned, struggled offensively, certainly. But in terms of the series, I don't feel confident in the Bucks. I think last night's performance, while it was, important to get that Game 3 win and give themselves a chance to go, back to 2-2 if they can win at home, it just wasn't a performance that, screams confidence in me. I think you do mention Giannis. I think we do need to talk about his limitations because, Blake Griffin was on him for a majority of the game. He was leaving him open from three. He can't hit. He hasn't shown the ability, especially in the postseason, to hit the three. I do like it when he does take shots, from the paint inside, more like floaters and mid-range. He seems to be comfortable there, but I mean, he's not great from the free throw line. He's struggling. I don't know what the exact percentage is so far in the postseason, but it's really bad. But Chris Middleton showed up. That's the biggest thing. I think that, while Giannis's play probably doesn't, scream a lot of confidence, I think Chris Middleton's does. And I mean, it was ridiculous. I think the percentage between those two guys in terms of total points of how many.
It was 76 out of the 86 or something like that.
Yeah. And I think, Drew Holiday could certainly play a lot better. I think,
He's shooting Eric Bledsoe splits from last year. Yeah, it's pretty.
And cool. Credit to Drew Holiday. He did have that big spin move at the end of the game that helped them take that lead down the stretch. But yeah, KD was that shot at the end of the game even looked like it had a shot going in. So I think, yeah, even without Harden, I still think the Nets will take care of business here. I just don't see the Bucks, having that great of defensive performance and the Nets shooting that poorly. I think Kyrie had he underperformed yesterday, and I think they'll show up in Game 4. They might even win Game 4 in Milwaukee, but I think at max this goes to 6. I think the Nets will take care of business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think along the same lines in terms of the Brooklyn Nets. You saw in the first quarter the Bucks came out hot, and then they failed to adjust to what the Nets were giving them for the rest of the game, and they barely escaped. And that should not have come. It should not have come to that, based on the way they started. It should not have come to that. In terms of Giannis himself, he's hurting his team when he takes a bunch of threes. Like, that's the way we could put it. He's not a perimeter player. He needs to be in the post, but he also doesn't have many post skills either. So, in terms of Giannis, I think he is who he is at this point. And that is a player who's always going to have limitations. Because if he's not getting it, he's going to turn 27 this December. If he doesn't have a jump shot now, I don't think he ever will, like a consistent jump shot. And in terms of his post skills, those can certainly improve. But, how long till they actually come into fruition? Like a Kevin Garnett, like a Shaq. When is he going to perfect it to that level? And I just don't see that happening within his prime. So, if Giannis has another superstar, like a perimeter creator for him, then he could possibly be the number one option on a championship team. But there's not another superstar out there who's on his level, there's not another on the Bucks currently. On the Bucks currently, as currently constructed, they don't have a star on Giannis's level who could be a perimeter creator. So I don't know. I don't really see them doing much in the series. They barely escaped last night. And then, the Nets probably could steal one in Milwaukee. We'll see. Depending on if Harden does come back or not. I still have the Nets taking the series. That's pretty much my whole takeaway from it. It was more bad Nets than good Bucks to me.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I wanted to mention was, on the broadcast, they were talking a lot about Chris Middleton and putting Giannis in screen actions and working it together to get, Chris Middleton better looks and even Giannis better looks. And it worked in the first quarter, like you mentioned, but then the Nets make adjustments and they didn't really go back to it. They were kind of just, letting Chris Middleton score, which he was very effective. But like you mentioned, Giannis was not really effective after the first quarter. He really was inefficient, which is why I'm concerned. And like you mentioned, I think we both agree they're probably not, I don't have confidence in them even winning Game 4. I think the Nets could come out easily. And the one other guy who, will play a role for the Nets going forward is Jeff Green as well. Right. Whether or not he comes back in this series is a major question, but he was great for them playing as, a smaller 4 and even a smaller 5 alongside KD. So I think his impact could be huge too if they can get him back as well.
Right, and we're going to take it to another series that's going on right now, which is the Atlanta Hawks versus 76ers. So as we saw, the reports came out the other day that DeAndre Hunter is going to miss the rest of the season due to a meniscus tear. So with that being said, given Hunter's injury, what percentage of a chance do you see the Hawks beating the 76ers? Because there was a lot of people picking the Hawks prior to the series based on their hot shooting. So I wanted to know what percentage chance you give them and why.
So currently, this changes a little bit. It's 28-20 after the first quarter, right, which is important because, I saw, the Knicks are, they had a great season. And I, as a Knicks fan, I was, genuinely happy with the way it happened. Obviously, the performance in the first round was not. But when we went down to Atlanta, it was difficult to play. They were just – it was – the fans at MSG were, definitely tough to go against for Trae Young. But I mean, obviously he shined in that series. But yeah, the Hunter injury certainly plays a role. I personally took and believe that the Hawks were going to win this series going in. I just don't believe in this Sixers as they're currently constructed. I think especially with the way they wasted Joel Embiid in Game 1. I mean, he's not playing fully healthy. He has the meniscus tear, right, and yet they still blew it. So I think, honestly, it could go either way now, especially with the Hunter injury, because he's a great two-way player. He showed a lot of offensive capabilities as well in that first series, and without him, they lose a guy that can take responsibilities on, for example, maybe Tobias Harris or Ben Simmons, depending on who you put him on, but. Yeah, I mean, it could go either way. I think Trae Young has shown in these playoffs that he is, ready for the moment. I mean, guys like Bogdanovich, John Collins, Clint Capella. I mean, they have some of the greatest depth in the NBA right now. I think that team is so loaded. They have Gallinari coming off the bench. I mean, Kevin Huerter has been very efficient. And, they don't have Cam Reddish yet either, who, I don't know what his status is. I knew he obviously missed the first round, but could come back soon. So, yeah, honestly, I think this will go 6 or 7. I do believe the Hawks could still win it without Hunter. But it really just comes down to, besides Trae Young, because I think he'll show up. I think he's going to get his 25, his near 10 assists every game. But, how efficient is Bogdanovich? How efficient is John Collins? Because, when John Collins struggled in the Knicks series, the Knicks ended up going and winning Game 2. And that's when he got into foul trouble. But when he showed up, he was great. So I think it's really the supporting cast. I trust Trae Young to show up. It's really just a matter of who shows up and, how efficient those guys are for the Hawks.
Yeah, so before the series started, it was 60-40 Sixers for me. The Sixers had a 60% chance while the Hawks had a 40% chance. I'm going to knock the Hawks a little bit to probably 30-35. I'm going to be more generous than most, because although Hunter is a big piece, he's probably their third or fourth best player on the team. I mean, despite him being a big piece on both the offensive side, being an efficient shooter and an efficient scorer in general, and then on the defensive side, being a great perimeter defender. I mean, when you take a look at the rest of their team, he doesn't really his loss doesn't have as monumental of an impact as people may think, because they're loaded with shooters. They're loaded with shooters all around. And I think based on if the Hawks, it was a tweet I made a couple months ago. When the Hawks get going, when they shoot, it's impossible to stop them. They're absolutely impossible to stop when they go on their hot streak shooting wise. And I think their depth of shooters, despite Hunter going out, they still have guys like Gallo. They still have guys like Bogdan. They still have guys like John Collins, Trae Young. All of these guys can shoot it from the parking lot. So when you take a look at their array of shooters combined with their interior force with Capella, I don't see that why I should knock them to a 20% chance or a 10% chance just because they lost DeAndre Hunter, who didn't even play in Game 1, and they still, despite that, they still won and were leading for the majority of that game. So despite him being an excellent piece and his loss is going to hurt, I don't think it really hurts as much as people may think.
Yeah, and it also is important to mention he missed, I believe, around 25 games in the regular season, especially that late stretch with Nate McMillan, because obviously the Hawks were not the team we thought they were going to be with Lloyd Pierce. Then obviously Nate McMillan comes in, and it really changed, and he wasn't there. So yeah, I completely agree with you. But in terms of anybody can go off on any given night, we saw it in the next series. I mean, Gallinari was great for certain games, and even when you want to possibly double Trae Young, well, it really isn't that effective because you have Bogdanovich, who is shown throughout the season that he is a great shooter when open, even can hit some contested ones too. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I think people will probably think because he's such a good two-way player that it's a big deal, but honestly, they can really do it without him, and they showed it in Game 1, of course, going on the road in Philly, a tough environment, and winning without him. So yeah, I completely agree. I'm a little more optimistic in terms of being around 50-50 just because I don't trust the 76ers and even Doc Rivers, because obviously people question him after Game 1 because I believe there was one stretch in the second quarter where he just went to the second unit and Trae Young just took complete advantage of it and blew the game open. So yeah, I think it's pretty close for me, but I would lean towards the Sixers probably in a 7-game series, but Hawks can certainly do it without DeAndre Hunter.
Yeah, and to keep it going, I wanted to know in the Western Conference, it's looking like the Western Conference Finals is going to be between the Utah Jazz and the Phoenix Suns. Which team do you think is the team to beat in the Western Conference? Which team do you think is the best team in the Western Conference out of those two, and why?
Yeah, so I think, without Mike Conley, I would even probably lean the Jazz. With him makes it even, more leaning towards Utah. I think the thing that really, gets me to that point is, we saw, in the first round with the Suns and the Lakers. I mean, credit to the Suns because they did, almost let the Lakers back in Game 6. I mean, they kind of made it interesting, but when you have a closer like Chris Paul and Devin Booker was great in that elimination game, they managed to get through it. I'm not too sure if Chris Paul is fully healthy. I think that shoulder is still bothering him a little bit, but I mean, the Jazz have looked so good in the first two games of this series, and especially against Memphis once they got Donovan Mitchell back. And I think the Suns have looked great too. I mean, the Nuggets certainly are not the same team without Jamal Murray, but they're still, a monster in that Western Conference that are very difficult to beat. So winning both games at home, especially the way they did, is a very good sign. I honestly think a Suns-Jazz series is a 6 or 7 game series. I would probably lean towards Utah, I think, just because of home court advantage. I think it would be tough to see Phoenix go on Utah in Game 7 and win. But those two teams are very even. I think, DeAndre Ayton and Rudy Gobert matchup would be really fun to watch because DeAndre Ayton's played very well in his first postseason. But, I mean, Devin Booker, the stars will show up in that series. I think right. Donovan Mitchell, Devin Booker, Chris Paul's leadership. So that would be a very enticing series just for a neutral. So, yeah, I think it could really go either way, but I would take the Utah Jazz in a 7-game series.
I think the bettors are going to have a tough time picking a favorite for this series because it is so hard to pick against or for either of these teams. I mean, they're as even as you can get. I mean, both teams have a great defense. Both teams have a great offense. Both teams have the star power. Both teams are loaded with depth. I mean, it honestly just comes down to preference. And it comes down to mainly the stars you can rely upon. And I trust Devin Booker and Chris Paul a little. It pains me to say this because do I really feel like saying this? Because you have Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert on the other side. And it's hard to go against them. But no, in terms of preference, I have to lean with the Suns, mainly because I trust Devin Booker and CP3 more than I trust Mitchell and Gobert. And in terms of their offenses, I think their offenses, their shooting, it all cancels out. And then defensively, I mean, the Jazz defense, the biggest part of the Jazz that concerns me, and which is why in these past 2 games, they've had these leads, but they've given it up, is because of the non-Gobert minutes. As soon as Gobert comes off the court and they replace him with Favors, teams love to attack the rim. They love to put pressure at the rim. And I think that's really going to hurt the Utah Jazz in the series against the Suns. Chris Paul is also a pick-and-roll maestro. So, I mean, you take a look at that, and then Gobert struggles with guarding the pick-and-roll in the past. So when you take a look at all that combined with how much the Jazz defense is depleted without Gobert, and compared to the Clippers, the Suns' offense actually can the Suns' offense puts a lot of pressure at the rim in comparison to the Clippers. I just think the Suns will edge that series out in a brutal 7 games.
Yeah, it's a matter of inches. I mean, you could really go either way. And it would be nice to see Chris Paul get to the finals. I think that's probably the coolest story we could get out of that, just because, he's been written off so many times, and it would be nice to see him get there. But yeah, either way, it's going to be a great story. I mean, you take a look at the Suns last year. They weren't a playoff team. They went 8-0 in the bubble. Then they get Chris Paul, add all of this depth, and then they make the finals for the first time in a long time. And then you take a look at the Utah Jazz following the turmoil of the shutdown last year. Would Gobert and Mitchell even be on the team this year? Would their relationship be repaired? And then them possibly making the NBA Finals. I think either way, we get a great story. You can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Completely agree, yep.
Yeah, so with that being said, let's keep it going. We're going to stray away from the playoffs for a little bit, and we're going to get to some interesting news revolving two franchises, and that is the Trailblazers and the Boston Celtics. Both teams, but Brad Stevens has now become president of basketball operations, I believe, for the Boston Celtics. They're looking for a new head coach, and the Portland Trailblazers have parted ways with Terry Stotts, so they're looking for a new head coach as well. So I wanted to know, Christian, which two coaches do you believe will be good fits for both of those situations and why?
So funny enough, I think those teams will be fighting for,
Yeah.
they might be fighting for the same guys. It'll be interesting to see. I think for Portland, we've seen, Mike D'Antoni's name thrown around because Jason Kidd obviously was a name I believe Damian Lillard talked about. Then he took himself out of it. But it also might be interesting because we could maybe see Damian Lillard get traded to the Celtics. I mean, that's a possible rumor. We don't really know. But, I mean, the Trailblazers situation is a little more iffy because, you have a couple guys. I think Yusuf Nurkic's contract is partially guaranteed. I think Norman Powell's a free agent. So it's interesting to see if they can even hold on to Damian Lillard. I don't know what will happen with that, but I think D'Antoni would be a good fit if, as currently constructed. In terms of their offensive capabilities, they would still be bad defensively, which is the problem. So I maybe lean towards more of a guy that schemes more defensive minded, but obviously D'Antoni has shown he makes offensive teams look really good. Hence why the Rockets looked so good for such a long time. They didn't perform in the postseason, but obviously they were great offensively in the regular season. And then in terms of guys like for the Celtics, I think the name that's been thrown around a lot is Chauncey Billups, maybe Sam Cassell. I would like some of those guys, maybe try something different. I think it was, Brad Stevens' time was up. I think it's nice to see him go back into the organization in a different role, just because, he was important for them, but obviously it didn't work out. So, yeah, I think, D'Antoni for the regular season would certainly be a plus for the Blazers, but I honestly don't know if Damian Lillard's going to be there next year. But yeah, I think a guy like Sam Cassell or Chauncey Billups, certainly for the Celtics, I think they could. Their future seems to be a little more brighter just because they don't have a disgruntled star who seems to be ready to leave versus Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. I mean, they do need to see. I think the biggest question with the Celtics this offseason is what do they do with Kemba Walker? Because obviously, they brought him in to be that third guy. He hasn't really been healthy, and even when he's been on the court, he hasn't really been effective. So I guess what they do with him would really be the determination. But I think, giving a guy like Sam Cassell, who seems to be deserving of a coaching job, same thing with Chauncey Billups, who's been a great, assistant under Ty Lue. So I think either one of those would certainly be good for the Celtics.
Yeah, in terms of the Celtics, I think they should go after Mike D'Antoni. I really do. And the reason why is they already have good defensive personnel. You look at Jaylen Brown, you look at Jason Tatum, Marcus Smart, Robert Williams. Those are great defensive pieces that you already have in place. And as we saw with the Houston Rockets in the first year, when they had great defensive personnel, the Houston Rockets had a top 10 defense under Mike D'Antoni. And I know Mike D'Antoni isn't the main reason for that. You'll have assistant coaches organizing the defense. But what Mike D'Antoni can do on the offensive side of the ball is historical. And we've seen it multiple times. We saw it with the Houston Rockets, their 5-out situation, just shooting consistent threes, live and die by the three ball. We saw the 7-second or less offense in Phoenix. I mean, this man has organized some historic offenses, and I think the Celtics' problems lie on the offensive side of the ball more than the defensive side of the ball. And I think with Mike D'Antoni organizing the offense in a unique way, it'll really help them match up with other teams really well. And it'll also help them get the most out of their star players and every other role player as well in that system. So I think Mike D'Antoni should be the choice for the Celtics. Another interesting candidate, I'm not sure if he's put his name in the ring for the Blazers, is David Vanderpool. I mean, he helped develop Damon CJ when they were coming up in the league. He is currently not with Minnesota, I believe. He left after this season. So if he's on the market, they could go get him. I mean, Dame has a close relationship with him. CJ has a close relationship with him. I think that could be good if they want to appeal their stars. I think Alvin Gentry is also a possible option. We saw that with the young Pelicans team. He didn't do so well, but like when he had proven stars like AD and Drew, He organized a great offense, and he led that team. He coached that team to a first-round win over those same Blazers. So I think any option could work. I think Mike D'Antoni is the biggest prize in this race out of all the coaches, but there are a lot of great candidates out there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think D'Antoni's a guy who, you mentioned, I mean, people are going to want him pretty badly, and I think both those teams should certainly go for him. I think, he could really work really well with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and even Kemba Walker. I mean, if they, try to revitalize him. So I think, he's a prized possession at the moment. I think, he will definitely find one of those jobs. It's just a matter of which job he likes more. So I guess it really just depends on Damian Lillard because honestly, either way, I think you have stars on both teams, and I think both teams are suited to, perform quite well in the regular season. I don't know about the postseason yet, certainly with the Blazers specifically, just because, they really don't match up well defensively, and especially with a lot of these, loaded teams in the Western Conference. But either way, I think one of those jobs will go to him, and then it's just a matter of who's left and who's available for the other team.
Yeah, and we're going to keep it going here. A popular debate that's going around with all these young players going off is who is the best among these two players, Trae Young or Devin Booker? Which one would you pick moving forward and why? Christian, I'll start with you.
Oof. Oh, man, that's you're splitting hairs right there. That's probably, I mean, honestly, as somebody who watched Trae Young, destroy my team for 5 games, it's definitely appealing to pick him, but I'm gonna lean towards Devin Booker here. I think he showed in that first round series what he is made of, especially in the postseason. I mean, shot creation. I mean, he's one of those guys who finally gets to show what he can do in the postseason, which is the best thing because honestly, for years upon years, we knew what he was capable of. He had his big bursts of scoring opportunities, but never got to show it because the Suns just weren't good. And now that he has, a maestro in Chris Paul right next to him, and DeAndre Ayton's a great big, they finally have that supporting cast for him. I think, Trae Young is, he's also showing what he can do. And I think, he is one of those guys who has the ability to knock down deep threes, create for everybody. I mean, the amount of alley-oops to Clint Capella and John Collins in the first, set of games in this postseason has been ridiculous. So he's, a great playmaker, a great scorer. He's got the ability to draw fouls. He has basically everything other than the ability to play defense. And, it'll be interesting to see if teams start to try to take more advantage of him. The Knicks certainly did not do that. And, it made sense. They didn't really have, the guys to take advantage of him. But I think, I'll lean towards Devin Booker. But like I said, it's splitting hairs. You can really go either way. Both are superstars. But I'll lean towards Devin Booker.
I have Trae slightly over Devin Booker, and I'll take Trae Young. And the main differential for me is the playmaking. I mean, their scoring is pretty comparable. Maybe you can give that to Book. But Trae and Book, in his own credit, is a really great playmaker, especially off the ball. But Trae Young is a historically great playmaker already. I mean, his passing is some of the best I've ever seen. His on-ball creation, how much defensive attention he draws with the ball in his hands, and how much opportunities he creates at the rim and for his teammates on the perimeter is just phenomenal. And I think when you take that playmaking gap between the two and you combine it with the close scoring gap, I think Trae has the pretty clear advantage on offense. Although they're both elite on the offensive end. And then the biggest differential comes down to whether you want Booker's solid on-ball defense with bad off-ball defense or Trae's horrendous defense altogether. And for me personally, since they're both guards, I don't really value it. I mean, I value it, but I don't value it as much as I would value like someone who's a great rim protector and someone who's not. Sure, so when you take those into consideration, I would lean Trae. But, man, it's close. It is really close between the two.
For sure.
But if you don't have anything to add, thank you guys for tuning in. This was another great episode. We'll catch you guys next Friday. You already know, on the TWSN YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to go follow us on Instagram as well, at TWSN __. Make sure to go download our mobile app as well. We have great new content coming out. New series is coming out on the YouTube channel. New articles coming out. So with that being said, thank you guys. We'll see you next week.